because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Did you know, Justin, that the thing about Tenet is that it goes backwards and it goes forward?
What? Welcome, everyone. This is Cows in the Field. This is another movie podcast. And in this podcast, we like to follow the Werner Herzog dictum and try to articulate ourselves and articulate the philosophical themes buried in popular film. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're talking about Christopher Nolan's 2020 film, Tenet.
We all believe we'd run into the burning building. But until we feel that heat, we can never know. You do. You chose to die instead of giving up your colleagues. That test you passed? Not everybody does. Welcome to the afterlife.
Being a bonus episode, we are going to divide this episode into two parts. The first part will be a spoiler-free discussion because we expect that some of the audience may have not seen Tenet, may be on the fence about whether to see it. Then we will announce partway through the episode that we've reached the spoiler part of the discussion, in which case, if you haven't seen the movie, you can press pause and come back after. And in that part, we will get into the nitty gritty. Okay, so why do I like this movie so much? I mean,
why do you?
Ultimately, I'll make the case for this movie on a lot of grounds, including emotional and thematic grounds. But I think, if I'm really being honest, the reason I like this movie so much is because it is dealing with time inversion, which is, I think, one of the coolest things I've ever seen on a film. And let me just give you an example of how time inversion works. And this is not from the movie. I just wrote this story last night when I was trying to fall asleep. It's one paragraph story. It's very short. And I think it kind of illustrates how cool time interacting with a time inverted object is. All right. So here's how the story goes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one day you notice something odd in the trash. And so you're investigating, you find some strips of colored canvas and you pull them out and you arrange them on the ground. And suddenly you feel the urge to destroy them. You're just like, I want these strips gone. So you take a pair of scissors to the canvas, but when you do so, it reveals something odd. Cutting the strips actually knits them together. So irritated, you cut faster and faster, but the more you cut, the more the canvas connects. And then with one final cut, you reveal that it's really a painting. It's a painting of an old man holding a paintbrush. You marvel at what happened, but you're even more intrigued by the painting itself. It's familiar in some way. So you decide, well, rather than just destroy it, you'll frame it and put it on the wall. So as the years go by and the painting becomes part of your daily life, the itch to paint starts to grow in you. So you start to take painting lessons. You think, maybe someday I could be like this guy in the painting. Well, one day then there's a knock at the door and someone has left you a box. You go and say, okay, what's inside this box? Inside, you see it's a paintbrush and an easel, but it's unlike any you've ever encountered. When you pick them up, they remind you in some way of the canvas you found so many years ago in your trash. As you bring the paintbrush towards the canvas, you notice for the first time that the paint on the canvas is wet. You bring the brush to dry it, but as you do, the paint rubs off the brush. Again and again, brushstroke after brushstroke, you paint the paint off the canvas. Eventually, you're left with a blank canvas. And finally, glancing in the mirror, you realize who it was all along. There's a knock at the door, and you know what must be done. You put the paintbrush and easel back in the box, hand it to the man at the door who, without speaking, walks backwards down the street and out of sight.
Whoa.
So that's just to give you an illustration of what it's like to be a person who's moving forward through time regularly, but interacting with an object, in this case, a painting and a paintbrush that are moving backwards in time. So if you're painting with a backwards, like an inverted paintbrush, when you paint with it, you'll be pulling the paint off of the canvas. When you're destroying a canvas with scissors, you'll be creating the canvas. This is ultimately the idea that's at the core of Tenet. And you get to see this again and again and again in this movie. And it is so cool. It's so cool to watch someone drop a bullet by having it fly into their hand. I think this idea of how when you're interacting with an inverted object, causation is reversed. That's the central idea. It's not so much time inversion, but it's the interaction of a non-time inverted object with a time inverted object. That's the fundamentally interesting thing that Nolan is doing. And so that's the thing that I think is so visually and conceptually compelling. But as we're going to get into, there's more. And again, we're still in the spoiler-free part of the episode. So other aspects of this movie, if time inversion is not your thing, it's really a movie at its core about friendship. And one of the things you're seeing is a friendship develop, but in a really unique and weird way. Something we'll get into in the spoiler part of the podcast. It's a friendship between John David Washington's character and Robert Pattinson's character. And they have a real chemistry, these two actors. And you're getting to see how they, by the end of the movie, you understand the structure of their friendship. But it is a really unique one. And I find that the magnetism between these two actors, like, incredibly compelling. Mm-hmm. It's also a movie about toxic relationships. There's a character played by Kenneth Branagh who's married to a character played by Elizabeth Debicki. And they're in a very problematic, toxic, controlling relationship. And I feel like that is another point that although it's played broadly and with, very broad strokes or whatever, it's mirroring, I think, a real human thing. It's really, I don't know. Do you want to say more on this?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think, yes, like Sator, Kenneth Branagh's character is a full on like Bond villain. But like what Kat is going through in that abusive relationship is something that I think is quite common. And there's like what she's bringing emotionally to that film will probably resonate with a lot of people who've been in toxic, controlling, or just deeply unhappy relationships.
I mean, I'm going to try to make the case that the central emotional core is between Pattinson and John David, but I think that Laura, you're going to make the case that the central emotional core is with Kat. Like the emotional core of the movie lies with her. And so with Debicki. So we'll get into this as that's in spoiler land. Here's another pitch for the movie. It has an amazing score.
Oh, God,
the score is so propulsive. Past guest Bilge Ebiri wrote an entire article on the how amazing the score is and how you can't stop listening to it. And I feel exactly the same way. There are some incredible lines in this movie, one of which is Aaron Taylor Johnson saying,
temporal pincer movement.
Yeah, that's Laura's favorite line of all time. So I wanted to give you that line.
Nobody talked. They're running a temporal pincer movement.
What?
The pincer movement. But not in space, in time.
Oh my God, I love it.
What does that remind you of, Laura?
Okay, so we watched this dumb Vice video, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something, with these like guys with Cockney accents who eat nettles.
Competitive
nettle eating. Right. Because I guess nettles like sting when you touch them. So it's like a very uncomfortable experience to eat nettles. Anyway, these weirdos are doing that. But at one point, the interviewer says, "You're a bit of a legend in the nettle game." And we have been saying that to each other for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Hey, you're a bit of a legend in the nettle game?
Well, yes, I'm the world record holder at nettles.
And imagine somebody who talks like that, but also has like a mask on, and then also like for half of the movie, and then also maybe like the mix is such that you like have no fucking clue what he's saying all the time. That's what's happening in this movie, and it's amazing.
It is very cool. One last pitch is that it in a weird way, it is a climate change movie, much like Interstellar, and it's clearly made by a parent who is deeply concerned about the future of the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. When Sator says like my greatest sin was bringing a son into the world that I knew would end, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that one hit home for me.
Yeah. So, okay. So speaking of sons, I'm going to say, and this is right before we're about to go to spoilers, but I want to give a tidbit of it before, if anyone turns it off. So I think, and I'm about to make the case, that the central organizing lens or theme through which we should see the movie is as a father-son movie. Okay. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, what? And that's fine. And now at this point, we're going to go into spoilers. So now, if you haven't seen the movie, and I would really encourage you to just watch it and don't listen to this, because you want to see it with fresh eyes, and again, it will bear out multiple viewings, I think. Okay, so now we're going to enter into spoiler territory. Okay, so I said that the movie is about a father-son relationship. And you might think, well, who are the father and who are the son? Well, we do have a father and a son in this movie. We have Sator and we have Max, his son. But this is not really their story. They're never in the same scene. They're never ever seen together. This is not their story. Well, who else has kids? Well, Kat has a kid. It's Kat's son, Max. But she's not a father. No. The father here that I'm talking about is the protagonist, John David Washington, and the son is Neil, played by Robert Pattinson. Okay, so here's why. Here's the basic idea. So if you go to the end of the movie and Neil says, "For me, this is the end of a beautiful friendship." So what we've learned at that point is that John David Washington goes on to found Tenet in the future, and he ends up recruiting Neil into the organization and mentors him. So now, once we learn that, that explains a lot of stuff. It explains a bunch of plot contrivances that would otherwise be huge, just like Deus Ex Machina stuff. Why does Neil know how to reverse bungee jump? Why does he know how to speak Estonian? Why does he have a master's degree in physics, right? Well, John David Washington knew he would need to know all these things. So in the future, when he's recruiting him, he makes sure that he knows those things. Now, that's just the first step. Now, presumably, we think young Neil here is being, he's interacting with John David as an older man, right? He's aged and he's, he's not his spry self that we see. So he's the mentor to Neil. But I think he's also his father. Why? Well, there's some reason to think that Neil's biological father is actually Sator, that Neil is in fact Max. Now, here's the evidence for this. And this is not I'm just taking from stuff that's been circulating in the internet. So the first piece of evidence is that Pattinson dyed his hair blonde, which to make it look like Kat's son, Max. And also Debicki has blonde hair. And the other piece of evidence is that Max, his full name would be Maximilian, the last four letters of which are L-I-E-N, which you reverse them as Neil. And then people have pointed that out online. So there's some reason to think that Max, namely the son of Kat, who she's trying to save, is in fact Neil. Okay, so if that's right, then what you're seeing is that John David Washington, at the end of the movie, is basically recruiting Neil, but when he sees Max, he's recruiting Max into Tenet. And maybe he's even marrying Kat, or who knows, right? He's, whatever he's doing, he's becoming either a father, an adoptive father, or a father figure to Max / Neil. If that's right, then now we can think about how Neil sees the protagonist, John David Washington. Well, he sees him as this amazing badass. He knows all this stuff. He's got all these wild stories, but he's also an old man, right? So for Neil, these are just stories, right? He's heard like all these exploits that the protagonist got up to. But then he learns that he's going to invert and go back to meet his father as a young man and get to see him in his prime. But he can't reveal any of this, of course, because he never did. And so their relationship is a father-son relationship, except the classical relationship of a father to son is inverted. Here, it's the son who ends up being the mentor to the father, at least on screen. Mm-hmm. Although John David mentors Neil off screen, on screen, it's the other way around. Neil knows he's part of Tenet, right? He knows everything. He knows the protagonist. He's met him before. He knows all these facts about him, but he can't tell him. So this explains why their relationship is so unusual at the beginning of the movie, right? They're just like, Neil comes in and he's a little bit tipsy at first, right? And Laura was wondering, well, why is he actually drinking, in the middle of the day?
Yeah, it's a noon meeting in Mumbai. And well, I also thought that never seems to be a character trait ever again for the rest of the movie. He's so competent. He's so put together. He's so blasé. I was like, why is he all rumpled in this first scene? It doesn't make any sense. Except then if you think about him being nervous to meet his father as a young man.
Yeah.
Like that would be a little like exciting, but unsettling.
And he doesn't know how he's going to react. And he doesn't know how his father is going to react to him. I mean, he's never done this before. And so he's trying to feel it out. And so what I think is so interesting about this is that you get to see a relationship develop over the course of the film. That's a weird one-sided relationship, but that's what parental relationships often are. They're one-sided. The parent knows more than the child. They are the one who has to withhold information from the child.
Right. They have to sort of mete out information as it becomes appropriate.
Yeah, as it becomes appropriate. Exactly. And that's exactly what Neil does. Because again, Neil being the son, now the relationship is inverted. So Neil, the son, is the one who has to withhold the information and sort of mete it out as needed. Which he does again and again. He lies, or at least is not fully honest with the protagonist. And when the protagonist gets angry at him for this, he says, well, it wouldn't have really done any good for you to know that then, which is exactly what a parent would have said to a child in that circumstance.
Yeah. I love too when you said that's what's so wonderful about rewatching this movie. There's a lot of things that are wonderful about rewatching it again and again, but watching Robert Pattinson's performance as Neil and how he threads that needle is so good. But he has these like knowing smiles a couple times in the movie. It almost seems too as if like, because he knows who his father will eventually be. Yeah. And at times he feels like he's sort of like playfully nudging him in that direction. Because when we see the protagonist, he has just come off his stint of being with the CIA. And he's kind of stiff and like incredibly isolated. And he says things like standard operating procedure. And at one point, Neil kind of like parrots that, like almost laughingly, like standard operating procedure, like ha ha ha. Because that's not who presumably the protagonist will become. It's not really like the father figure that Neil knows very well. And at the very end, when he asks, are you going to go check on Kat? And, and the protagonist says, well, no, that's far too dangerous, because that would be how the CIA would approach it, maybe. And Neil kind of gives him the smile and is like, not even from a distance. Because, of course, Neil knows he's going to. He's going to more than check up on them. He's going to become a part of their family. But he's got the smile where he's just like, it's just fun. It's like, it's, you said this is an inversion of the father-son story in every way, but it's also like, it's like the inversion of How I Met Your Mother. Like he knows his parents' love story before they do. That's so funny.
Yeah.
And he's almost nudging him that way. It's almost like he's like planting the seed for the protagonist to go visit Kat.
Yeah.
Which, maybe that's a close causal loop, maybe not. I don't know. But like, it's cute. That
also reminds me, one thing that you've been pointing out to me as we watch the movie is that the journey of the protagonist, the character arc of the protagonist is one from someone who has an affiliation to a cause that he doesn't understand, but it's this global, like big, it's the stakes are so high, it's the world, it's everyone, but it's impersonal. He doesn't have any personal connection to anything. He just is, well, I got to save the world, obviously. But his journey is to the end of the film, finally having that personal connection to Neil, to Kat, and that's his journey is to kind of overcome that standard operating procedure thing and become more of an emotionally connected person. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I want to zoom out slightly and contextualize this film within the broader context of at least two other Christopher Nolan movies. And the other ones I want to talk about are the two other big budget sci-fi epics. So this would be Inception and Interstellar. Now, the context here, basically the claim I want to make is that this parental father to child relationship is, I think, a through line between these three movies. It's an evolving relationship, and it mirrors exactly Christopher Nolan's relationship to his own children. Okay, so start out with Inception. And here we have the experience of being a new parent put to film. And in particular, one aspect of being a new parent that Laura and I think, are intimately familiar with is that you're so close to the time before you were a parent that you still have these memories and almost desires to return to that time. Oh, yeah,
totally.
That's a feeling, I think, that's very apparent to new parents. But it's also one that I think new parents feel a lot of guilt about.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, you want to have time away from your kids, but you feel guilty when you're away from your kids. And I guess it's a twofold thing. It's simultaneously the pull to want to be back with your children and your family, but it's also the guilt of desiring to be away from them at the same time. That's the twofold thing. And what happens in Inception is that you have two characters, Cobb and Mal, Leonardo DiCaprio and Marion Cotillard, who are experimenting with this kind of multi-layer dream thing where they're able to spend longer and longer stretches of time together in a dream, but that only takes a short period of time in reality. That's how that sort of time dilation works in the dream state. So it turns out that eventually they go deep enough in their dreams so that they can spend an entire lifetime together. That's only been like a couple hours of daytime, right? Of actual time. And so then they wake up out of this situation, and what do they find? Just imagine that you lived an entire life away from your children. You've pursued all of your creative ambitions and so on. And you wake up and there's screaming kids, and you're like, oh my God, my life is this incredibly boring, mundane life filled with like responsibilities to these ungrateful little demons, And I could imagine that you would feel an immense amount of guilt for that, how much you loved the feeling of being away from them for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for years and years. And I think that is the guilt for me. That is the more interesting guilt at the core of Inception. Of course, there's also this guilt of, Cobb feeling guilty that Mal killed herself because of his idea. But I think that's on the surface. I think the sort of deeper guilt is this relationship that he has to his kids and the guilt that he feels for wanting to be away from them. Okay, so again, father to child relationship being at the core. Interstellar, now this is the one that's really easy because Interstellar is very clearly and obviously a father to daughter relationship. But what I think is interesting is that now that relationship has grown. Now the kids have grown a bit. Now we have Cooper, Matthew McConaughey, and he's been a parent for a while. He's got Murph, who's preteen basically. So he's not like, he has some pull to his old life, but it's not the same. He's not feeling guilt about it because he doesn't feel like there is any life to go back to. What he feels guilt about and his relationship is about what he can tell Murph, his daughter, about the truth of what's happening. The world is ending. The only way to solve it is if he gets on a ship, goes far, far away, and may never return. And how does he convey that to her? He doesn't. He just sort of says, well, I'm going to be back and I'm coming home. And, Murph is so confused that when Brand, played by Sir Michael Caine, drives the truck back, Murph thinks he's back.
Right.
Murph's like, is he come back? Because she thought maybe he would only be gone for like a day, like he didn't convey in clear enough terms, partly because he didn't want to burden her with that information, the magnitude of the situation. And so he deceives her. Of course, deceit is another thing that's played out in that movie. You have Professor Brand deceiving his daughter, Amelia, and the rest of the world that he can't solve the gravity equation, right? He says he can, but he really can't. And so here the parental relationship is one where there's a kind of inevitable failure. Like you are doing your best to protect these people you love who you don't think can handle the enormity of the situation. So you deceive them, but then you feel guilt about the fact that you've deceived these people for their own sake. And this plays out with the relationship of Murph to her father, where she has to go through this experience of whether to forgive him or how she grows with that and so on. So again, it's a relationship of that's growing, a relationship that changes, and it goes into adulthood and so on. Okay, so now we've seen two sort of parent-child relationship movies. Tenet now, unsurprisingly, takes the parent-child relationship and inverts it, and that's what we're seeing. Is that now you have the relationship of the parent to child. Now the child is an adult. And what happens when a child becomes an adult is that's when the relationship inverts. The adult is now dependent on the child. As the adult gets older, needing elder care and so on, the child is less dependent on the adult. And in fact, the child is teaching the adult about stuff, teaching the adult about technology.
How to use the iPad.
Exactly,
right.
that kind of thing. The whole relationship has been inverted, much like the main theme of the movie.
Hey, you never did tell me who recruited you, Neil. Haven't you guessed by now? You did. Only not when you thought. You have a future in the past. Years ago for me, years from now for you. You've known me for years. For me, I think this is the end of a beautiful friendship. But for me, it's just the beginning. We get up to some stuff. You're gonna love it. You'll see. This whole operation's a temporal pizza. Whose? Yours! You're only halfway there. I'll see you at the beginning, friend.
So I think that is one of the key ways of thinking of this movie. Is really can be thought of as a thematic trilogy about the evolution of the parent-child relationship, going from young parenting in Inception to sort of, parenting, adolescence in Interstellar, finally parenting adults in Tenet.
I was thinking too about like the Neil protagonist thing and about adult relationships with your parents and parent relationships with their children. But so when we're at the end of the movie, Neil has already had a long relationship with the protagonist. And this is the end of that journey for him. And it's the beginning for the protagonist. He's only known Neil for like a week. So he's got years and years and years to know Neil, Max, Neil, whatever. Yep. But I was thinking in terms of the parallel there with the children and parents that you're pointing out, like if you're a 20-year-old person, your parents have had a very active, conscious parenting relationship with you for 20 years. Like before you were conscious, right? Like there's so much parenting stuff that's happening right now with you and me that we are never going to forget with our kid. And like, he has no idea.
He has no idea. That's right.
He has no idea. And then when they're kids and teenagers, they're taking all that for granted. I don't think they're really, unless they're like railing against their parents, my mom doesn't let me do that. My friend's mom was. But like, I don't think I certainly as a child and as a teen was not that conscious of the kind of like sacrifices, choices, parenting things that my parents were doing for me. I was more of thinking about like what they allowed me to do and didn't allow me to do, like when my curfew was. And so like that relationship maybe doesn't consciously start for me until I'm an adult. And then I'm actually thinking about my relationship. So it's sort of like the starting point is different for me than it was for my parents. Who have been consciously thinking about their relationship with us. And then maybe don't think about me as much day to day now, right? I'm gone. I've left the nest, like the sort of heavy lifting has already happened for them. And the heavy lifting, sadly, there may be some heavy lifting in my future, right? As
That's
my
right.
parents age.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's also, it's interesting too, in that one aspect of the aging process is the loss of memory.
Right.
And not for everyone, but for many. And, losing that relationship, then the burden to maintain that relationship goes to the child rather than the adult. So that's another component of it where, in a weird way, although John David Washington's character is very young, but he doesn't know. He's like the adult at the end of the relationship who doesn't know the child and anymore. And he's going to find out who the child is, right?
And I don't know that there's a lot of the themes of Inception in this, but there's certainly the same, there's the resonance with Interstellar in terms of Neil, as you pointed out, like withholding certain information and sort of having to kind of thread that needle.
Yeah.
You knew it was me coming out of that vault. Why didn't you say? It's a lot of explaining when someone's about to put a bullet in their own brain. But afterwards? Things the same. I knew it'd be okay. It's happened. If I told you and you acted differently, who knows? Policy is to suppress. Whose policy? Ours, my friend. We're the people saving the world from what might have been.
So, I don't think that Nolan has had like a super strong history with his lady characters. I think his most compelling characters and his most compelling protagonists have tended to be men. But I think Kat is really great as a character. I'm really excited about her. I was thinking about this because you told me, I'm not on film Twitter. I don't know what people are saying about this movie. You just tell me what people are saying about this movie. But apparently people are rolling their eyes at a particular Kat line. It's after Neil warns that if the algorithm is brought together and the future people are able to successfully invert the world, that everybody and everything that has ever lived will be destroyed instantly. And Kat says, including my son.
Yeah. So that's the one everyone laughs at and thinks, and they say, yes, obviously it follows as a logical deduction of everyone will die, that your son will die as well.
Okay. Yeah. My response is shut up. Is that following the Werner Herzog dictum to articulators?
I think that's right. I think Werner would be okay with that.
Me saying, shut up. No, I mean, I think that's so silly. I mean, obviously, logic stands that her son would also die if everybody in the world dies instantly. But I think what we're not appreciating is that Kat is being really human in that moment. I think like just at a surface level, how else do we understand abstractions in the world besides at the like personal, with our personal experiences or through our personal relationships? I think, when something devastating is going to happen to a large amount of people, you think about the people you love the most and how that's going to affect them. Right? When we think about climate change, you and I, and how like the world is going to change, I think about what that means for our son.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you another example. There've been a lot of wildfires in California, and one of them took, my parents haven't lived there for a while, but their old house was burned down in one of them a few years ago. And when I concentrate on that makes it much more palpable and immediately present than when I just think of the statistic, like 60,000 homes burned. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of homes. But then I think about that home that I used to live in and spend a lot of time in. And then I see the pictures and it's gone. And I go, whoa, that's like, it feels so much more real.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, and storytellers know that, right? Like that's why Spielberg colors the coat in Schindler's List. That's why there's a love story at the center of Titanic. Because if we just watched hundreds of people die on a boat for 2 hours, like that would not have the same resonance as watching Rose lose Jack. In terms of like prejudice, right? The data shows that if a person holds prejudiced beliefs about a group of people, if they come to meet and get to know a person that has that characteristic they're, prejudiced against, be it race or sexual orientation or whatever, that can help change their mind more than any other type of logical argument with them about tolerance. Like if they think they, don't like gay people, and then they meet somebody who's gay, who's a human being, that actually does make a difference. Yeah. It's one of the few things that can make a dent in that kind of prejudice. So I think when Kat says, including my son, she's just responding the way that literally we all do. It's just that she's saying it out loud. And maybe it sounds silly when it's in a movie and said out loud, but I just think it's like deeply human and normal. So that's my rant on that.
Okay. But
I think what's more interesting about that is like how we're setting up the contrast between Kat's perspective and her motivations and the protagonist's. Because I actually think like the protagonist is a total weirdo here. in that, he's totally committed to the fate of an abstract concepts of like the fate of the world and people out there and future generations, right? Like he does seem to be animated by like statistics, as you said, more than his personal relations, because it seems like he doesn't have any, and, he seems to maybe like actually consciously avoid having personal relations because they get in the way of what he goes there to do. That's the test that he passes.
That's the test. Yeah. He'll sacrifice himself for anyone.
He doesn't value his own life.
He doesn't even know these guys. They're just his team.
Yeah, right. And Sator calls him a fanatic for that. He's like, he's devoted to something he doesn't really even understand. And he says shit like standard operating procedure. And he admits that he's willing to take out take a woman hostage. He's willing to put Kat in further danger, for his own goals, because as he understands it, like, he's trying to prevent World War III.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a pretty good,
it's a great motivation. I'm just saying it's not how most people work. So meanwhile, Kat is on the complete extreme end of things. She's completely and utterly focused on the circumstances surrounding her and her son, and she cares about nothing else. And she's explicit about that. And I think, as I already expressed, I think that's pretty universal to think that way. But I also think it's like her tunnel vision is a symptom of being in an abusive relationship. And, her life is a living hell, and she's completely consumed by what's like been sort of emotionally wrought upon her. She's by her own anger and her misery and her desperation to be with her son, and also her desperation to be free of Sator, and the way that those conflict with one another, and her shame, and maybe even being tempted to be away from her child so that she can be free of Sator. She has no emotional energy left for anything else. She could not really give a shit about the future generations of the world right there. And I don't blame her for that. She's just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And
that's a good point. Actually, can I just on that point, that like her initial clash with the protagonist on the boat is over exactly that. She's like, why did you save him? Because this is just to put the context. She has tried to kill Sator by flying him off the boat, right? And so he drowns. But the protagonist saves Sator, and she's like, "Why did you do that? Like, I want to get him out of here so that I could be free of him." And John David is like, "Well, I need him, and it's about more." She's like, "I know he's a bad guy, and you're obviously working with. You've got some big plan and everything." But like, and he's like, "Well, it's bigger than all that, right? It's bigger than you can imagine." And but she's just like, "Yeah, but like, I got a circumstance too. Like I got a bad situation too." Right.
Yeah. They're sort of teaching each other, because she does come to help. Right. So he's like, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than you. He's so much more than you think, than the bad guy you think he is. And meanwhile, later, Kat says when she does become on board, right, she becomes a pivotal part of the plan. She keeps Sator from killing himself so that they can take apart the algorithm again. She says, the chance to save my son, you can't know what that means to a mother. And he doesn't know what that means. He will know soon enough, when he becomes a surrogate father. But he really doesn't understand that human experience. And she is not in a place to be able to sort of understand his perspective either. But they're meeting in the middle. Yeah. You don't see it happen, but you know that it will happen, because you know that there's more to come in the story of Tenet. But yeah, so I think that's all really cool. And I think for me, I mean, I love the first half of this movie, actually. I thought like the setup was really fun. But as soon as she sits down at that dinner table and starts telling her story to the protagonist, really raw and vulnerable, about, the living hell that she has with her husband, and this failed attempt at betrayal that now has like completely shackled her to him. I was all in on this movie from that moment. I think Debicki's incredible in it, and I love the Kat character. She's complicated. She's proud too. Like, she's desperate, but she says like, "Oh, I don't need your redemption." And I love too that, she kills Sator on her own terms. Like, and she's just like, fuck it. Those boys can figure it out for themselves. Like, she's like, I'm helping a little bit, but you guys are taking too long, and I'm not going to rub sunscreen on this guy's back anymore. Have you ever tried to rub sunscreen on somebody's back you don't like? It's really gross. And that sound.
The sound. Yeah.
Sorry if that was too much too much in the mic. But no, it was, the sound effect is hysterical. The Foley on that is like real strong. But like, I think she's just like, fuck it. Like, I played your game for a little bit, but like, no. I can't have him think he won. Like, I have to have
this is her time.
It's my time, you know? And like, I think that's great. I love her. She's strong and she's sassy and she's proud. But she's also like destroyed. It's great. She's complicated. I also just like that it's really her and Laura, right? The lady scientist. Those are kind of the lady characters. There's also the woman who leads the others, who's the Ives counterpart, right? Hi, it's Laura here. Quick apology. The lady scientist is named Barbara, not Laura. Clearly that was wishful thinking on my part. I read an article that called the scientist lady Laura many, many times, but it's not Laura. I checked it on IMDb and on Letterboxd.
This is Clemens Posey we're talking
Clemens Posey.
Yeah.
Her name is Barbara. But I like that we've got Laura and Kat, who are both like sort of like two people that have committed their lives to studying materials and trying to understand where they come from in space and time.
I mean, it's cool.
I think it's cool, right? Like Kat's job is to analyze works of art and assign it value. And a huge piece of that valuation is how old it is and where it's been, its provenance, right?
Yeah. And its origin.
Its origin, right. Exactly. Right. Which is, based on, how do you determine its origin besides the style of the hand, right? Is its age. And so she's using X-ray technology and stuff to try and understand, try to trace the paper's movement through time. Right. And then meanwhile, Laura is trying to trace the bullet's movement through time, but from the future. Those objects are inverted. But I just like those two science ladies.
Her is just sort of audible
She's so
sigh
bored.
when he asks her so I need to know the stakes here. He comes in and he's all all right, so give me the stakes, lady. She's just okay. It's World War III.
Okay. God. She's
What
you
more?
ask a lot of questions.
Stop asking questions.
She's just dunking her tea bag and giving him the stink eye. I go back to analyzing my metal alloys now.
I think at one point he asks her, he's where'd this come from? She's I don't know. I just got assigned this stick of this chunk of wall. It was just my assignment, this chunk of wall. I didn't get any answers to the questions. Stop asking me stupid questions.
I think this movie is really funny in places. I think it's intentional.
I don't know if we'll talk about we'll do a funny recap.
Okay.
We'll do funny recap
cool.
at the end.
All right. That's my moment on Kat.
Good pitch on Kat.
Thank you.
I think that, especially when you think of it in the context of Christopher Nolan and his sometimes less than
Dead
stellar
wives.
Diversity among his cast, in particular among, not having many female leads. And
he's got a lot of dead wives in those movies.
Yeah. Okay. So point taken, right? But so
no, whatever.
To have
Kat's
a
awesome.
strong female character who is in many respects, she's not fighting the protagonist, but she's in the mix.
I think this movie's a three-hander.
Yeah, all good points.
Yeah, I saw some article in Vulture that said she was sort of that Debicki's character is saddled with this arbitrary emotional arc of it's the only emotional arc of the movie, and it's stupid because she cares about her kid more than the rest of the world. And I'm everything about that makes me angry.
Yeah, but that's what I mean about these takes on this movie were they saw the movie Monday and they had to write the review in less than 24 hours and they couldn't go back and rewatch it. What are you going to do? It's very hard. I think it propelled a lot of people to write very surfacey, criticism of this movie. And it's very easy to criticize on the surface. All Nolan movies are incredibly easy to criticize on the surface. On the surface, you're just this is stupid. It doesn't make any sense. There's no emotions. There's no characters. Everyone's just an archetype. Literally in Inception, it's director, editor, producer, right? Those are the characters, basically. This movie, the character's name is the protagonist. There's so much, and he says, I'm the protagonist, right? There's so many things where it's this is self-parody.
Yeah, but he says it cool. He's I'm the protagonist of this story.
He's fucking cool, man. But I think that's all so easy. It's don't reach for the well, I shouldn't get on my high horse here, but it's
we both had our rants now.
It's such an easy critique. It's dig a little deeper, right? Like Ives says, don't be afraid to dig a little deeper. dream a little bigger. Right? He says that in Inception.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
All
I was
right.
just thinking about how Eames and Ives are similar names.
So speaking
Sorry.
of digging a little bit deeper, there is this interesting feature of John David Washington's performance, which is that, and character, which is that his character has no name. He has not really any personality. He also, I mean, he has a personality in the sense that he's quippy and
He's
stuff.
sassy and he likes words.
Yeah, but he has no clear backstory, no clear motivation for what he's doing. Why is he willing to sacrifice himself? We don't know. We have no idea.
That cracked me up, by the way. The part where like when he first gets introduced to the word Tenet and he's like, I quit. And then the
guy's just
CIA
like, "Here's
guy,
the
he's
word."
like, well, I have this new thing for you. The stake, it's all about, what is it, like the fate of the world? And John David Washington's just like, what is it? I'm in. He just quit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So easy criticism is like, okay, well, this is like underdeveloped writing or something, right? Okay, fine. But when you dig into it, you start to see, okay, well, what is it like to interact with an inverted object? Okay, so to drop an inverted bullet is to hold out your hand and have the bullet fly back into your hand, right? That's what it's like. It's cause and effect are reversed. What you're seeing first is the effect, the bullet being there, and you're first, and then you see the cause. The cause comes from your perspective after the effect. So what we're seeing in this movie, here, I'll give you another example of this. So when he first exits the airlock and he's inverted, the puddle starts to move before his foot even raises to go step in it, right? You're seeing again the effect of him stepping in the puddle before the cause. So what's happening with John David Washington's character? Well, so normally if you're just interacting in a normal way with the world, the cause would precede the effect. So the cause of joining Tenet would be like, oh, I don't know, this thing happened to me and it made me really care about time inversion or whatever. And then I get into Tenet, and that's what like gets me into it. But here the cause and effect are reversed. So him being pulled into Tenet is actually being caused by him in the future, pulling in a certain respect, him as the bullet in this case back into his hand, namely Tenet. How he's doing that is he's planting all of these obstacles and problems and characters for him to interact with to pull him in. So he's drawn ultimately into this inevitable future outcome by the forces of reverse causation. And so I think that explains, to some extent, why he just willingly goes along with everything that's happening. In a way, it's familiar in some weird way, just like if you were to sort of have dropped a bullet and that by that flying back into your hand, you would have to have like formed the intention of dropping it. But again, you're going to drop it in reverse, right? So it's that same thing of like somehow that causation is inverted. And so he's being pulled along and he can't really understand it or explain it, but he's just going with it. I think the other thing that's interesting about that is it explains a little bit to why he has no name or backstory, because what we're seeing is his backstory.
Right.
We're seeing the backstory of who he will eventually become, namely the founder of Tenet. So in a way, he is this blank slate at this point in his like career as a character. But we don't know that. So that's why when the first time you watch the movie, you're thinking, this is very weird. Like this guy has no name. He doesn't have any story. What's going on? How am I supposed to figure out who he is? And I think the answer is you're learning who he is. He's becoming who he is in a way. And I think that fits with the overall theme of the movie. Okay, so another thing that I want to talk about is the metaphysics behind Tenet. In particular, the picture of time that the movie presupposes, which is basically a kind of block universe picture. So the idea here is that time is really understood as a fourth dimension among all the other spatial dimensions. You have three spatial dimensions, you have a fourth temporal dimension. And so moving in time is then analogous to moving in space. If you were to imagine the block kind of arrayed from a sort of atemporal perspective, you could move, left, right, up, down, and so on. But then there'd be a temporal dimension as well. Of course, when you take that atemporal perspective, you sort of see everything, all space and all time, unchanging. You just see it as it is, just for all time. And I think that dovetails with Neil's line that he says throughout the movie and then repeats at the end of the movie, where he says, what's happened happened. What's happened has happened. And so I think that is that's sort of the ultimate picture of the movie. And this is something I want to come back to actually about, John David actually says at one point, this reversing the flow of time, doesn't that mean that if we're here, we've already succeeded? And he's right, I think, on this picture. In a sense, the fact that time was never inverted shows it will never be inverted. And so they have already succeeded. But then, as Neil points out, that's not an excuse to do nothing. It just means it's an expression of faith in the mechanics of the universe. You still have to play your role within this greater scheme. One question that comes up, though, in this picture is whether the characters have free will in such a universe. And so take, for instance, Neil at the end of the movie. So Neil knows that he was the one who picked the lock for Ives and the protagonist at that final underground layer or whatever.
Yeah, whatever that is.
He realizes that he's like, oh, okay, that was me in there. So now at that point, he knows he has to go back and invert and then pick that lock and help them. Now, you might think at this point, does he have free will? Can he choose to not do that? And I think the answer to that is, well, yes and no. Of course, he will do it. So will here is weird. He will, from the temporal perspective of where they are moving forward. Sorry, from his temporal perspective moving forward, he will do it. Of course, that what he's going to do is in the past.
Right.
So
right, from protagonist perspective, he already did it.
He already did it. Exactly. Right. So it's already happened, but you might wonder, well, can he not do it? That's the sense you might wonder about whether he has free will. And now in a block universe, there is no indeterminacy with respect to the future because the past and the future are all the same. They're all laid out equally. So there's no asymmetry between the past and the future in this regard, where the future is determinate. Sorry, the past is determinate and the future is indeterminate.
Okay.
So you might think if there's no indeterminacy, then there's no free will. There's a certain type of view about free will called incompatibilism. And in that sense, I think he does not have that kind of incompatibilist free will on this picture. But there is another sense of free will that he might have, which is sometimes called compatibilist free will. Basically, that is the kind of freedom that you can have when your action flows from who you are as a person. So take, for instance, somebody who, decides one day to rob a bank and then they go and rob a bank. You might think, well, that action was free as compared with someone whose family is held hostage and they're forced to rob a bank. Their choice to rob a bank is not flowing from who they are as a person, but it's they're being put in a circumstance.
Under duress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the sense in which the first person has free will is what's sometimes called compatibilist free will. It's free will that's compatible with, notice I didn't need to say whether there was any indeterminacy in the laws or, that kind of thing. This is a kind of free will that's compatible with there being no indeterminacy and no sense in which, And nonetheless, we would still, I think, talk about them as having freedom, and we would, and that sense of freedom dovetails with how we feel towards these two people. In the one case, we feel that person is deserving of punishment and so on, and resentment and that kind of thing. But the other person who was doing this under duress, we don't feel that way about them. We treat them very differently. And so that's a sense of freedom, that this compatibilist sense of freedom that these characters, including Neil, can have. So you could say, well, yeah, he in some sense doesn't have to do it. That he will do it will be
it's
out
like
of
who he is.
who he is as a person.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
As opposed to, say, Kat, who doesn't have that freedom to leave Sator because he has put her in a situation whereby he's holding her and her child hostage. Right. So another thing that you get out of this picture is when you see the block universe from the atemporal perspective, there's a symmetry in the laws of nature. The laws of nature can, picking any point in time, can be extrapolated backwards to predict what would happen in the past, and extrapolated forwards to predict what will happen in the future. So you might think then the universe is in a sense, from a certain perspective, completely symmetrical. But it turns out that it's not entirely symmetrical. And that's because entropy only seems to flow in one direction. So entropy, by that I mean, is that there seems to be an increase in the amount of entropy in one direction. So if you were a god looking at the universe, you would see there's an interesting asymmetry. There's a kind of left and right to the universe that is built into the direction with which entropy increases. So for instance, you're going to see when you trace your finger, so to speak, left to right along the block universe, what you'll see is things like cups breaking, and you'll see gases, filling rooms, expanding into rooms.
Jam getting stirred in and turning something pink, and not the other way around.
Exactly.
Yeah. We should reread Thomas Stoppard's Arcadia at some point.
Yeah. So okay, but that's
Arcadia. Yeah.
But if you trace right to left, what you see is those processes reversed.
Yes.
Right. So there is this kind of asymmetry in the entropic state of the universe, and that's this asymmetry in entropy that many people think could provide a basis for the direction of time, and that's the thing Nolan is working with. So this idea of Sator's ultimate plan of the people in the future's ultimate plan to reverse that direction of entropy. That's what they're talking about, is just to basically flip that arrow. So now suddenly those entropic processes work right to left rather than left to right, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question though, and then this is related to this big, ultimate plan of Sator's, is you might wonder how these dead drops work for Sator. And this is something we talked about.
Yeah, that broke my brain for a second.
So because you might wonder, well, how does it work that you in the future could communicate something to yourself in the past? Like you might want to say communicate like a stock tip, or you might want to give yourself in the past gold that you've got in the future. So how do you do it? Well, what Sator does is he inverts whatever it is, the message, the gold or whatever, then he buries it in a place where he knows no one's going to dig it up between when he got it in the past and when he buries it in the future. So between, say, T1 in the past and T100 in the future. Then in T1, he goes back, or he somehow communicates to himself that's the place to dig it up. He digs it up and he finds it. And of course, before T1, it wasn't there because it was moving backwards from T100 to T1.
Yeah.
There was nothing there before T1 because he got there to intercept it, so to speak.
Yep.
And so that's how these drops work.
This is what I mean, though, when I said Sator must be like an incredibly organized person.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, you got to know where all the drops are.
Yes, at a different time. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really astounding. He's got a lot going on, and he has time to psychologically torture his wife. Like, how many hours in the day does Sator have?
He's got a lot because he can keep reliving the same day over and over
right.
again. But there's the difference, because since entropy is working in one direction, getting something in the past to the future is a different situation. So suppose you want to get this algorithm, you're Sator, you want to get the algorithm from where you are in, 2020, let's say, to the people in the future in, say, 2050. Well, his plan is ostensibly to bury the algorithm in this Stalsk 12, and then they dig it up 50 years later or 30 years later. Or whatever.
But it will have always been there. Or not always been there?
Yes, it will have always been there in that period of time. So between 2020 when he buries it and 2050, it will just be sitting there. But then here's a question. Like the heroes know, the protagonists know that's what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
So like, even if they don't succeed can't they just dig it up? Like there's like a lot of time between 2020 and 2050, let's say. where you could just go and dig it up and like steal it. I don't really know.
Well,
what the plan
okay, but then
was.
there's like this thing about when Sator dies, it like sort of signals immediately to the future that it's there, and there's no time between that when Sator dies and when they're able to dig it back up again. Then the future will able to get.
I see.
To
So
it.
you're thinking the future people sort of they know that it's going to be there in 2020, so they come back, they invert themselves back to that point, and then they just dig it up immediately after he does the signal.
No, I wasn't thinking that.
Because what I'm worried about is that there's a lag between when they get it and when he buries it. And anytime in that lag, somebody could come and just grab it. And anyone who knows it's there could just grab it, unless he's like protecting it or something. Okay, so that's one question.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, my brain hurts because like even if there's just like a 5-minute gap between when Sator dies and it comes together, and Sator's like, it's together, future people come get, like, by the way, it's buried there. Wouldn't that sort of like mean that future people can like immediately get it?
Sure. Like we don't know how his signal works.
Yeah, I don't understand.
So the
this,
way his signal works is it could be like, it's like an email. They say it's like an email bomb or something.
An email bomb.
So it's something like it just is timed to go off in the future at, a certain time, right? It's like an email that gets scheduled and then is sent in the future. So that can be effectively instantaneous. That's fine. But then they have to know, and maybe this is what you're saying, then they have to say, okay, so that email bomb was sent, let's say to January 6, 2020. Let's suppose that's when he did it. So then they say, okay, we got to go back to Jan 6, 2020 and go grab this thing. That's what they would do.
I see.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. Fine.
But they don't have time machines. If somebody's having to go like just invert themselves for 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, that's what they would do.
What a nasty job.
Yeah, that's what they would do. And then that's why I think he's also thinking,
right, because there's no guarantee that 20 minutes later, or 20 years later, it's still actually physically
they just go back and get
there.
it. Yeah, they go back and get it, and then they just use it right then. That's why I think he thinks it's going to happen instantly, that they're going to just grab it right then, use it, and everything goes to shit.
Right, that's what I was going to ask, because they're like, if the algorithm's together, then like, boom, everybody dies instantaneously, is what they said. Not everybody dies, like in 20 years. But
it doesn't take time. Yeah.
Right.
No, but this is the other thing that's relevant to what John David Washington says, is that we already know that the world continues in the standard entropy way after that scene, this Dallas 12 scene, and the Vietnam boat scene. Why? Because most of the movie has already taken place in that period of time.
Right.
So we already know the universe doesn't stop then, or whatever. The universe doesn't end then. So in a way, we already know that Sator is going to fail. At least in this regard. I mean, maybe later this will change, the things will change, but for what he thinks is going to happen, namely the world's going to end right there. We already know it's not going to end right there. And because he has gone on to do other things. And that's the way the block universe works. It's always been that way.
Even if Sator does not go on, because he is dead at this point.
Yeah, well, he's going to die at that point. But that other Sator, who is the one who's going to eventually come back
live for one more week.
Exactly.
He's
still going to live for a week.
Live for a week.
So you might think that, okay, so if you think of it that way, you might think, well, then this movie's boring, because the end is a sort of foregone conclusion. We already know that he can't succeed. But I think what's interesting is that there's still a fun in playing out the role that you already know is going to happen. And if you think about it, what is that like? It's a little bit like being an actor. You know how the script ends. You know the arc of your character. And in particular, if you're a stage actor or something, you've played the part 100 times. But there's still a fun in playing out the role that's been assigned to you. Maybe it's a little bit different each time, or also maybe it's just fun going through it with an audience, right? Revisiting the same scene again with an audience. It's a little bit like maybe the fun of what it's like for a director to screen his movie for people, right? You know how it's going to end, but still it's fun to go through it go on that adventure with another group of people and have them experience it for the first time. So I think there is this kind of, unsurprisingly, perhaps, this kind of meta-reflective element of the Nolan, of this movie, a little bit like Inception, where he is playing out this idea of the movie itself as embodying the tenets for filmmaking, or as for exhibiting the film. And this is also something that Nolan talked about in the book with Tom Schoen. He talks about how film itself was the first time, with photography, but then also with moving pictures, the first time that humans were able to capture time and manipulate it. And you get to see, there are a couple ways we do this with moving pictures, right? We can speed it up. So we can have fast motion, we can have slow motion, and we can reverse, and we have cuts too. So there's this manipulation of time that you get with movie making that mirrors the manipulation of time that the characters are engaging in Tenet, right? And that is borne out in that the special effects in this movie are all basically just them filming people walking backwards and people walking forwards and interacting. That's basically the whole special effect. And it's super analog and simplistic.
Was we were going for a walk the other day and Justin was like, do you know how they did that scene where John Washington steps in a puddle? And I was like, I think I do. And Justin's like, they just had him step in a puddle. And I was like, yeah. Justin's like, it's so cool.
It's very cool though. It just looks really cool to watching a puddle step in reverse.
It is very surreal.
Neat. It's very cool.
I'm with Kat though. The birds are weird. That's like crazy really to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so simple. It's so simple, and yet, we without film would never be able to see such an thing.
And that was the thing he was getting at, is that like in Memento, the movie plays backwards, but you could have done Memento as a story, very easily. You just chapter to chapter is a new scene, but every chapter plays forwards. It's just that the next chapter comes before the one you just read. And you could do that in a story, but you cannot do what he's doing in this movie in any other medium. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. Our minds, you can't do it in the audio format because you take the words we're saying and reverse it. It's not going to work.
No. One.
You can't do it in literary format because reading backwards doesn't have that effect. It's only in the visual format that it allows you to do it, and to a certain extent in the musical format as well. So I think this is really cool. And I can sort of see where Nolan is coming from, where he sort of thought this movie is kind of, the movie that will get people back at theaters because it's the, it really shows the power of filmmaking, what filmmaking can offer people that no other form of media can. And, I think that's kind of cool.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of movies that are brilliantly filmed and visually striking that don't have like a compelling narrative. And maybe some people think that about Tenet just because it's so complicated. But, we watched a Terrence Malick movie the other day. It's gorgeous. But, the narrative part of it is a little fuzzy. It doesn't grip you,
a movie whose name shall not be revealed.
We won't say
one of us liked it.
We won't say which twirly it was. But like this movie is like incredibly visually striking, incredibly and everything about it is intrinsic to the medium of film, and also it's like a cool story.
Yeah. All right, so we're nearing the end of the episode, and I think we just want to go over our favorite lines, and then
sure,
and then we'll end.
Favorite characters, favorite lines.
Okay, yeah, favorite characters. Well, you had a tie between two supporting guys.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I don't know if it's ATJ, aka Aaron Taylor Johnson,
or Ives,
or
Himesh Patel.
Himesh Patel Mahir is his character's name. Now I've got IMDb out.
You
of
like
being
those
really careful.
guys?
Oh my god, I think on the third watch, Himesh Patel lapped ATJ.
Really?
Yeah. He's
the vegetarian thing is pretty funny.
The vegetarian, he's
just the way he delivers it.
He's sassy. Yeah. I don't know, like even like when he's timing his breath and Pattinson's kind of cocking, he's like 45 seconds ample, and Mahir's just like, you're gonna be running.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I just think everything about it. I just like his energy. He's just so. I mean, everybody in this movie is blasé about what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's and like bored / irritated, which is a funny vibe. I like it a lot. But Mahir is maybe my favorite bit character. Only got a few lines, only got a few scenes, but he works it.
Yeah. That's good for me.
Is it ATJ for you?
I do like ATJ. I mean,
because he's a bit of a legend in the Nettle game.
Yeah, it's because he's a legend in the Nettle game. Here's a couple lines from him that I really like. So this is during the briefing. The soldier says they'll have inverse ordnance, and Ives goes,
"These buildings are abandoned, but we learned there is a turnstile. Expect a bitemporal response.
They'll have inverse ordnance.
Inverse, conventional, forward antagonist, inverted antagonist. They have it all."
Wow, that's what he said. Because even on the third time, I heard
And then here's another part from the same scene.
Our job is to fail to defuse that bomb, while the splinter unit achieves its task undetected.
Which is?
Need to know and you're done. Any other stupid questions? Good, we'll discuss. Let's get ready.
Right, let's get ready.
You don't.
Are there any other stupid questions?
I also think that's like an inverted phrase too. Like you don't need to know. Need to know you don't.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, but I also like that it's a little bit like, I'm trying to stay away from meta stuff here, but it's a little bit like Nolan being like, just go with it, motherfuckers. Come on.
Yeah.
Like, I'm giving you the shit, but you're not going to get it.
You know what irks me about that scene is that his marker's out of ink.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts.
I know.
The movie's confusing enough as it is.
Let me give you one more Ives line from the same scene. I mean, this is an all-star scene, honestly. The scene fucking rules. Here's another one. So, okay, this is when, so like they break off, right? He's done the briefing, they break off, and now protagonist goes up to Ives and he's like, I wanted to be in the first wave. And Ives like,
There is no first wave. Red team and blue team operate simultaneously. Look, don't get on a chopper if you can't stop thinking in linear terms. Now, you want to be on the team that lifts the contents of the capsule.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's us. We're Splinter Unit.
Oh yeah.
he's just fucking, he's annoyed by him. He's just like,
he's annoyed by him the whole time.
Yeah.
When he first meets him, he's like cowboy shit. Like he's just like, oh, I gotta explain to this
Well, he
guy.
also went because at that point, like John David has got Neil up against, Pattinson up against the wall. He's like, somebody talked, and then Ives comes in real quiet. He's like, nobody talked. They're running a tempo pincer movement.
Not in space, but in time. Yeah. Can I ask a question? So you know how Neil knows that he's the founder of Tenet? Yeah. Does Ives know who he is? Because
I would think not.
Okay.
I would think not,
he doesn't act like he does.
Because again, it's because they never are supposed to meet ever again. Remember? At the end, they break up the algorithm and they're not supposed to know.
Okay. So he doesn't know this guy's kind of his boss.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, but that explains it, right? Like,
yeah. Okay.
Here are a couple other fun lines. I mean, the classic protagonist, I ordered my hot sauce an hour ago. That's a great line. Come on. That's such a funny line. And it John David has such charisma that he just delivers that line. And it's not a line you would have ever expected in a Nolan film. I love
it's more
that
like
line.
an 80s action movie vibe.
It's so good.
Yeah.
I think my favorite Sator line is after he's beaten a dude with a gold bar, like beaten him bloody. He looks at checks his pulse and he goes, 98, not so bad for such exertion.
Not bad for such exertion.
That is true, though. I get like barely going on the bike, and my heart rate is way higher for 98.
He's checking his pulse after he beat the shit out of some guy. Oh man! And then here's another line I really like. So Kat's like, "Who are you?" And Neil sits down and he's like, "We'll start with the simple stuff. Every law of physics," and then just cuts.
Well, they had a whole week, so.
Oh, it's great.
On the third day, he's like, chapter 3.
Yeah. And then just to get back though, more seriously, just to get back to like one, the friendship part. And at the end of the movie, the friendship is really developed between John David and Pattinson. But the part what really gets me every time, I really love is right after they've done the inverted go through the 747 crash, and they get on the other side and he's basically, and John David is like, why didn't you tell me that was me who came through the turnstile? And he's like, look, you didn't need to know you were going to like kill yourself at that time. It just wouldn't have been good. And he says, our policy is to suppress. And protagonist says, whose policy? And then Neil says, ours, my friend. We're the people saving the world from what might have been. And they're like, high five. And it's just one of these moments he always calls him my friend. And I feel like Pattinson just delivers that in such a earnest and loving way. And I just find it, I don't know, maybe I just like when people say my friend. I think it's like a nice thing. It's kind of like antiquated. Mm-hmm. But I find that very like endearing. And I think that's the part where the friendship has really been kindled. I really love that line.
Yeah. It's fun too, because, like it's cool to watch people do their job really well and like be really, just sort of almost like blasé about it, that is a certain kind of cool, right? Like walking away from a explosion like with no emotion. And this movie, everybody's doing really cool stuff and just sort of being like, it's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
But you also like want to see a little bit of celebration.
Yeah.
My only note for this movie, if we were going to make it like 3.5 hours instead of 2.5 hours, is that I wanted more Neil and protagonist like making the plans for their various heists.
Yeah.
You get like tiny little snippets of it. The protagonist being like, we need 4 cars. One needs to look,
we need a fire truck.
We need a fire truck, an 18-wheeler that can't be the same. He's like, but they're just sort of on the go and Nolan cuts it together so fast because there's really not time for it. But I would love that. I would love more the like buddy cop heist movie vibe.
Yeah.
And more time for Robert Pattinson to play in that pool.
Yeah, I agree. No, that'd be nice. That reminds me of one other aspect that you were mentioning before, which is how everyone's so blasé about everything.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that like that is the natural reaction of someone who has gone through the same event 4, 5, 6 times, right?
Yeah.
Because the whole movie is people doing temporal pincers, right? So like seeing what happens and then being like, yeah, okay, that was me helping myself then. So that means I'm gonna have to go invert and go back through this and do this and that to make sure that it always was that way, right? And you see this at the end where it's solemn, where Neil realizes that it was him back in the mine saving the protagonist's life, getting shot. He doesn't know he's going to get shot in the head. The protagonist knows, but he doesn't know. But he's like, that was me back in there because I was the one who picked the lock. And then protagonist knows that he's going to get killed. But Neil's just sort of like, well, just got to thread another stitch in the fabric of the mission or whatever. And that's just this sort of attitude of like, yeah, we're just kind of retracing our steps again and again and again. And so, yeah, you might be a little bored. You're like, I've seen it. I've been there a couple times. Just doing it over and over again. Temporal pincer is cool, but at its core, it's replaying something. And, replaying things is way boring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you and I were talking about this earlier, but like every time they temporal pincer, they're sort of like adding more to their to-do list.
Yeah.
Because they see things that have to have always happened.
Yeah,
And they have to make them have always happened.
I got to go back and do it now.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's Tenet. We like this movie a lot. We hope that, this episode gave you something to think about. We're curious if you have thoughts about Tenet, tweet at us at CowsPod.
We're Team Tenet, in case you haven't noticed.
We're Team Tenet. Are you red room or blue room, though? That's the real question.
Red room. I don't get. Blue's so confusing.
Blue's too confusing. I want to be in the blue room. You can find us online at cowspod.wordpress.com. As I said, we're at cowspod on Twitter. Please, if you enjoy listening to us, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and a rating. And we look forward to the next episode, which won't be a bonus episode because this is sneaking in. This is pincering in between the conversation and Groundhog Day. But the next episode will be Groundhog Day with Kieran Satya. So look forward to that. And I think that's it for this one, right?
Yeah.
Interior, turnstile, Talon Freeport. If you're not telling the truth, she dies.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You left it in the car, not the fire truck, right?
Who told you that?
Tell me now. Is it really in the BMW?
I don't know.
Tell me or I'll shoot her again.
Leave her alone.
I don't have time to negotiate.
Listen to me. I can help you.
3.
Don't.
2.
Sorry. Wait.
1.
Sorry. Can you fix this?
Line.
Okay. No.
Bang. Shoots through Cat's side. Next one's a bullet to the head. 1.
Please.
2,
No.
3.
Okay. The car, the BMW. I left it in the BMW.
We're going to check that this is real.
It's in the glove box.
Scene.
Okay. Do you want me to do it again?
Yeah, this is fun. This is fun. This is going at the end of the episode. All right, here we go. Now we're going to go in reverse. Okay, now the entire scene will play in reverse.
Okay. It's in the glove box.
We're going to check this is real.
Okay, the car, the BMW. I left it in the BMW.
3,
No.
2,
Please.
1.
No.
Next one's a bullet to the head. Bang.
I can't turn
1.
fast enough. Wait.
2.
Now I'm like
Don't.
lost. Don't.
3.
Listen to me. I can help you.
I don't have time to negotiate.
Leave her alone.
Tell me or I'll shoot her again.
I don't know.
Tell me now. Is it really in the BMW?
I don't know what you're talking about. Who told you that?
You left it in the car, not the fire truck, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
If you're not telling the truth, she dies. Scene.
Do you want me to do it again?
No, it's fine. It's perfectly fine.